Vancouver Island University. Hang on a sec, something has come up on my screen. Okay, yeah, and he's also taught at Vancouver Island University in the Elder College program. So he has a deep love of Canadian, Indigenous, and overall history, I'm assuming, Greg. And his name is not Brenda, just in case you're wondering. So without further ado, Greg is going to talk to us about his first ever book. And I think it's a really great thing to see something published that includes Nanaimo. It's been quite a while. So Greg, welcome.
Thank you very much, Christine. I'm just hoping everybody can hear me. No?
Yep.
Yep, everybody can hear me? Okay. Thank you, Christine, for those kind words. And welcome everyone to this virtual presentation about Joseph William McKay, the subject of my first book. I'm glad that you have decided to zoom in on this presentation. I will speak for around 20 minutes, and then there will be time for questions, which Christine will chair. Well, why write about Joseph McKay? He was a Métis and one of the few Indigenous employees of the Hudson's Bay Company to rise through the ranks to the top level. This was as a chief factor, one of a sort of Canadian board of directors for the company. He was born in 1829 in Wacaganish, Quebec, a small Cree settlement on James Bay. It was formerly known as Rupert House, one of the first HBC forts. His family had a strong connection to the company, both on his mother's and his father's side. His father, William McKay, managed a small post in Mistassini, Quebec. When he was 10, young Joseph was sent to Manitoba to attend the Red River Academy, a school for the sons and daughters of the HBC employees. He stayed with his maternal grandfather, Thomas Bunn, and his second wife, Phoebe Sinclair. At the academy, he received a good basic education. He finished in 1844 and planned to continue his education in Scotland, which was a family tradition. However, he literally missed the boat and joined the Hudson's Bay Company instead. He was only 15 years old. Joseph was assigned to Fort Vancouver in today's Washington state. Along with a small group of other recruits, he went by horse and canoe to Fort Vancouver, then the headquarters of the company's Columbia district. There he met James Douglas, second in command at the fort, who was to have a major influence on McKay's career. The young McKay impressed Douglas. McKay had been assigned to make all the arrangements for two British naval officers who were to tour the Oregon country, trying to determine where the final boundary would be between British and American territory. This was decided by treaty in 1846. In that same year, McKay was transferred to Fort Victoria, followed soon after by Douglas himself, who was promoted to head of the Columbia Department. The headquarters of that department was moved to Fort Victoria, as Fort Vancouver was now in American territory. In 1851, Douglas was also made governor of the new colony of Vancouver Island. Under Douglas, McKay's career really took off. First, he was made general manager of the Northwest Coast, based at Fort Simpson, near the Russians in Alaska. McKay successfully dealt with the Russians and the local First Nations. In 1849, he was ordered back to Fort Victoria. From 1850 to 1852, McKay was involved in setting up a salmon fishery on San Juan Island. He explored the Cowichan Valley and was involved in the Queen Charlotte, or as we call it now, Haida Gwaii gold rush, and more importantly, helped to negotiate the Douglas treaties in the Victoria area. McKay's Métis diplomatic skills and his knowledge of languages enabled him to participate in treaty negotiations, signing as a witness to 8 of the 11 Victoria area treaties. In August of 1852, Douglas gave McKay his most important assignment, that being the founding of the city of Nanaimo and developing the coal mines there. Some necessary background is needed before we proceed with McKay and Nanaimo. Coal was first discovered on the northern coast tip of Vancouver Island, where the HBC built Fort Rupert. This coal mining operation was a total failure from 1849 to 1852. Relations with the First Nations people were very poor, as were relations with the Hudson's Bay Company miners hired from Britain. The HBC, in quotes, fur traders, knew nothing about coal mining and treated the coal miners with little respect. The miners even went on strike. Some even deserted. Finally, the quality of the coal was not up to par, so the company gave up on Fort Rupert and asked Douglas to follow up on reports of coal deposits elsewhere on Vancouver Island. Douglas had known about coal in the Nanaimo area as early as 1849. It was Joseph McKay who found out from a Nanaimo man who was visiting Fort Victoria to get his gun repaired. When seeing the fort's blacksmith working, he remarked that there was lots of black rock where he lived. McKay was summoned and had a conversation with the man, and the legend of Ko Tai, or the Coal Chief, was born. McKay said that he could have his gun repaired for free and would be given a bottle of rum if he would bring samples of the coal to McKay. After a long illness, the man returned with a canoe load full of coal in April 1850. McKay was dispatched with a small party in May 1850, and he located a seam of quality coal at Wet'suwet'en Inlet. I can never pronounce that right, I'm sorry. Soon to be Nanaimo. He reported this to Douglas, but nothing was done as the HBC wanted to put all resources into Fort Rupert. Only in August 18...
that has also been bothering me, and I've been meaning to take care of it for days.
Was Douglas given permission to proceed? He ordered McKay to return to the inlet and set up operations for miners being transferred from Fort Rupert. Douglas' last instruction to McKay was in many ways his most important. McKay was not to address the miners directly, but always to go through Mr. Muir, their oversman. The mistakes of Fort Rupert were not to be repeated. McKay was 23 years old when he and a small party arrived at the future site of Nanaimo on August 27, 1852. McKay needed a workforce well beyond his small group of HBC men, and the only force available were the local people, the Sunemu. Again, using his diplomatic skills, he got them, men and women, to work for him after hard bargaining about payment for their work. They set to work gathering up the surface coal, which we call outcrops, and transporting it to the ships in the harbor. The Sunemu were quite familiar with the HBC, having traded salmon with them at Fort Langley. McKay traded with them for 8 deer while his men built a hut for themselves. McKay was taking care of their immediate needs, food and shelter. Notice there is no mention of building a fort, as was the case at Fort Rupert. Relations were much better at Nanaimo. The miners from Fort Rupert arrived on September 6th, and the HBC surveyor, Joseph Pemberton, arrived soon after with his associate, B.W. Pierce. They set up camp by present-day Comox Road, actually on Millstream Creek. This became known as Pemberton's Camp. He surveyed the harbor and named it Nanaimo, after a Sunemu word, Sinaimo, meaning big, strong tribe. The town site was named Colville Town after HBC Governor Andrew Colville, but this soon fell into disuse, and the whole area became Nanaimo. McKay discovered a salt spring, which would be useful as salt preserves food. Also, he opened a sawmill to provide lumber. McKay had done all he could right at the start to have the new endeavor successful. If protection was needed, it could be provided by an HBC or a Royal Navy ship in the harbor. By the end of September, the Sunemu were producing many tons of coal. The miners had established their first shafts, and McKay was particularly good at finding new coal seams for them to work. Mr. Muir was reluctant to use Sunemu men on the winch, as they would literally drop anything if they spotted an enemy canoe in the harbor. This could have disastrous consequences for the men working below the hoist. Work carried on into the fall. On November 13th, 10 inches of snow fell on which was to become one of Vancouver Island's worst winters. Weather would not be the only problem for McKay and his men. Back at Victoria, 2 First Nations men killed Peter Brown, an HBC shepherd. The motive was robbery. One man was a Cowichan, the other in Nanaimo. Douglas organized a large force of British Navy men and his own Victoria Voltigeurs to go after the culprits. One of them, the Nanaimo, actually visited McKay to proclaim his innocence. McKay told him that he had no authority and the man would have to go to Victoria to plead his case. On January 6, 1853, Douglas and his large force landed at the mouth of the Cowichan River. They were met by over 200 Cowichan who rushed up to Douglas where he was sitting, a cutlass in one hand and a bunch of presents off to the side with the other. He spoke to the Cowichan, demanding that they turn over the murderer to him. They refused, and more threatening gestures followed. Douglas simply waited them out for hours, but eventually they turned over the man to him. Then the force proceeded to Nanaimo, where negotiations failed and the murderer escaped. He was chased up a creek, which has been known as Chase River ever since. He was apprehended, and Douglas's justice was swift. The two men were taken aboard the company's SS Beaver, tried and found guilty by a jury made up of naval officers. They were then taken to Protection Island, where they were hung at a place known today as Gallows Point. One important, Douglas then and his big, large force returned to Victoria. One important result of this incident was the construction of Nanaimo's Bastion. It would be a place of shelter for HBC employees and others in time of crisis. Construction was started on February 3rd, 1853. By July 4th, 1853, the building was roofed. Only one entrance was built for defensive reasons, and its armament consisted of 2 large cannons and 8 smaller ones. McKay supervised the project, while 2 French-Canadian axemen, Jean-Baptiste Fortier and Leon Labine, did the actual construction, greatly assisted by HBC Iroquois employees. And there's a story, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard, of the men, probably in the bar, saying that they could be dragged over the timbers and would never get a sliver. William Isbister, the stonemason, laid the foundation. The timbers were fastened with wooden pegs, and the roof was cedar bark originally. As you all know, the bastion still stands in downtown Nanaimo. It has been moved twice. It stands 60 feet from its original location. In addition to the bastion, Joseph McKay was kept busy building stores and a warehouse, all surrounded by a white picket fence which went down to the waterfront. This became known as the compound. When Governor Douglas visited in August 1853, he marveled at the growth of the settlement. I quote, "The place has quite the appearance of a little village." McKay had to deal with other problems in Nanaimo. Widespread drunkenness would happen, usually when a ship was in the harbor selling illicit liquor. But on one occasion, though, McKay was surprised that the seller was Dr. George Johnston, the HBC physician who was selling it from his boat anchored in the harbor. McKay remained in charge of Nanaimo until July 1854. He certainly deserves his title as the founder of Nanaimo. B.A. McKelvey, a prominent historian of the 1940s, observed, "The marvel of that first year of Nanaimo's history is how the capable McKay achieved so much. He was a man of extraordinary ability." On Sunday, September 16th, 1945, a permanent tribute to J.W. McKay was unveiled in Nanaimo. His daughter, Miss Agnes McKay, unveiled a plaque to be attached to the Nanaimo Bastion, proclaiming Joseph William McKay as the founder of Nanaimo. Now, there's a story to this. I went looking for it just when I got my book contract, which was just before the pandemic. I asked Christine, I couldn't find it. And I said, "Where is it?" And she said, "Well, I don't know." She said, "I know they took it down when there was a huge renovation going on the Bastion, but where it is now, you'd have to contact the Nanaimo Museum." So I did. And Amy Greenaway, the curator of the museum, told me that the plaque is now on display inside the Bastion. Well, of course, nobody can get inside there right now because of COVID. She sent me a picture, and certainly it was the original plaque. There are also several BC geographic references in honor of McKay and his wife. After leaving Nanaimo in July 1854, McKay asked Douglas for 3 months' leave in order to get the Vancouver Island steam sawmill up and running. It was owned by a group of HBC men, including Douglas, but it had many problems. Douglas refused his request, so McKay left the HBC and soon had the sawmill running. The Crimean War had started between Russia and Britain, but the HBC had an agreement with the Russian-American company in Alaska to stay neutral in the event of war. The HBC needed someone to go up north and make sure this agreement was honored. Who better than McKay, who had spent 3 years up there dealing with elections. So McKay was rehired and went north. When he returned to Victoria in November 1855, he was just in time to run for the first Legislative Assembly of Vancouver Island. McKay needed to meet the property qualification of 300 acres, so he purchased a farm, which is now UVic, with the help of the HBC. Initially defeated by E.E. Langford, he protested that Langford did not meet the property qualification. It turned out that McKay was right. There was another election held, and he was the winner. Douglas was pleased as McKay's election gave the pro-HBC side a 4-3 majority, so Douglas could control the assembly. During McKay's term, the Fraser River Gold Rush started in 1858, which changed everything. 30,000 miners went through Victoria on one spring and summer. Remember, the population of Victoria before that was 450. Douglas sent McKay on an exploration to find a better route to the goldfields from Lillooet using House Sound. McKay found a better route, but it wasn't used due to the cost of construction. As a result of the gold rush, Douglas was made governor of the new colony of British Columbia, as well as Vancouver Island. The catch was that he had to give up all connections to the Hudson's Bay Company, and therefore the relationship between Douglas and McKay was over. The official relationship, they still retained the personal relationship. In 1859, McKay's term in the Legislative Assembly was over. He did not run again, perhaps because he had been tipped off that he was soon to get a big promotion and would be leaving Victoria. On July 27, 1860, McKay left Victoria to take charge of Fort Kamloops with his new bride, Helen Holmes McKay, who was from England. They would go on to have a family of 6, 4 daughters and 2 sons. McKay had just been promoted to chief trader, which meant that he was an officer and gentleman of the company, and more importantly, he received 1 share of the company's annual profits, and they could be quite substantial at that time. McKay distinguished himself in Kamloops, selling clothes and tools to the miners during the Caribou Gold Rush. He even sold rice to the Chinese miners. He left Kamloops in 1865 for Fort Yale, where he took charge of the transportation of the Hudson's Bay Company goods along the Caribou Road. In 1872, he was promoted again to chief factor, the highest rank in the HBC in Canada. He now received 2 shares of the company's profits each year. He was later sent to the Cassiar region when there was a gold rush there. In 1878, however, McKay was let go. It could have been either a firing or a gentleman's agreement because he had so many outside interests that were taking time away from his HBC duties. After that, he ran a salmon cannery for 2 years in the Northwest Coast. He then became Census Commissioner for British Columbia during the 1881 National Census. Finally, in 1883, he became a federal Indian agent stationed in Kamloops, but covering the whole Thompson-Okanagan region. As an agent, McKay stood up for First Nations land rights against the CPR, who were trying to steal their land. He also personally vaccinated 1,300 Indigenous persons. His final promotion was to Victoria, where he became assistant to Arthur Wellesley Vowell, Superintendent of Indian Affairs for British Columbia. During this time, he lectured and wrote about the fur trade and the First Nations of British Columbia. In 1900, after a long illness, he died on December 21st, 1900, in hospital in Victoria. His wife, Helen, lived until 1914 in Victoria. In his obituary, the colonists eulogized him as a pioneer of pioneers. So ended the remarkable life of Joseph William McKay. And now I'd like to show you the book. The book is available according to Monica Miller, who I believe is with us tonight. She is the marketing manager of Heritage House Press, who have published this book. It's Joseph William McKay, a Métis Business Leader in Colonial British Columbia. It is available in several local bookstores, such as Chapters, Window Seat Books, and Strong Nation. And Monica checked, and they all have the book available. So please check it out if you're interested in gaining a copy of it. I will now pass it over to Christine for questions.
Thank you so much, Greg. it's very timely, your book, is what I was thinking, in this particular age where we're looking at the relationships between the settlers and Indigenous people and Métis and other sort of how we're negotiating these relationships. So your book seems very timely to me. If anyone has a question, they can put their hand up and fire at Greg.
Don't forget, everybody's got to unmute now.
Everybody got to unmute. Greg, it was often said that McKay also had an interest in geology. Did you come across any information on that?
That is a very good question, and yes, I did. He had a lot of interest in geology. They called him an amateur geologist, but he did have quite an interest, and several of the outside interests that I mentioned involved geology.
Okay. So he had a very good idea of what he was looking for at the time. When he
yes, definitely. Yeah, okay. Definitely. He was looking at lead, zinc, gold, silver. There's a file in the BC archives of his outside interests. I looked at it, had a good look at it, but that was not part of my theme of the book, which was his career with the HBC. Right. But I'll tell you, it's very large.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is more of a comment than a question, but McKay always almost baffled me. He seemed like a Renaissance man to the power of 10, like how he could do so much and accomplish so much at the same time without the benefit of modern transportation, communications. Just like I don't know if anybody else has that. They must have the same impression of him. How could he have done so much in a short lifetime with under the circumstances he was living in? It's remarkable.
I agree with you. It is remarkable. And I do think it has a lot to do with his family background. They had very strong connections with the Hudson's Bay Company. And that allowed him, plus his relationship with Douglas, to proceed and get as far as he did.
Remember, Darrell's before social media.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
No Facebook.
I have a question, a couple of questions. I've been reading his notes on the archive site, and he was very meticulous. And so what was his education? Do you know?
Yes. The Red River Academy gave him a very good basic education. He knew English, he knew French, he knew the Métis language of the prairies, Mischief, and he picked up Chinook very quickly when he came out here. That was the language between the fur traders and the First Nations people for trade reasons. He was very, very good at that, and he had a good sound education.
Yeah, it looks like that was real asset for him because he was so meticulous. He noticed, like, the things he noticed were very, very adequately recorded, right? So that makes a difference, like with the relationships here.
Yes, you're quite right, and I would point out to you, and I think you're very right. His trip to find a new route to the gold fields, he went with a Colonel Downey from California, well, from Scotland originally. And Downey talked about all the problems they had with the First Nations groups they encountered on the trip. But McKay's notes were all meticulously dealing with the geography and the geology and the physical aspects of the journey. Only once did he worry about the First Nations, and that was when he got to Howe Sound, and a group of First Nations said they wanted to kill his guides. So the night before they were going to do it, he and Downey took off with their guides and whipped it down through Howe Sound all the way to Nanaimo the next day.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, good.
Did he have anything to do with the ultimate route up through Lake Harrison Lake and across to Seton Lake and that route, or was that something he laid out as well, or was that later on?
That was what that's a good question. That is what Douglas wanted him to do, was to find a better route than the Harrison-Lillooet route. And he did find that via Lillooet and Howe Sound, but because of the expense of developing another route, they stuck with the Harrison-Lillooet route until the Caribou Road was built.
Okay, great. Good, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Liz has a question, I see. Liz HK.
Hi, thank you very much. That was really interesting. I'll definitely buy the book. I might have missed this when you were talking, but was McKay at Yale between 1865 and 1870?
Yes, he was.
Okay, and he was stationed there like all year?
McKay he loved to travel. So he would move around. He went to Victoria frequently when he was stationed, wherever he was stationed, Kamloops, Fort Yale, whatever, because that was his base. And that's where his family actually stayed there when he was in Kamloops. So yeah, he did do a lot of traveling around at that time.
And did he keep really good records about things that he purchased?
Yes. In fact, they're showing up all over the place, either in the BC archives or through some other private collections.
His notes, you mean, of what he purchased, or?
Sometimes they were things that other people purchased, like a bottle of whiskey, and he would sign it as a Hudson's Bay Company man. He spent a lot of time in Victoria working for the Hudson's Bay Company at their store there. And he would sign purchase notes and things like that. And those have found their way into historical records.
I'm researching Coast Salish textiles, and he purchased 4 blankets while at Yale. And so I'm trying to find more information about it from his notes about those purchases.
Yes, he was very active in purchasing Coast Salish blankets and other things from the Coast Salish nations. And there is a section in the book, and rather than me try to tell you the sources are numbered and listed in the book, and you can go to them and you'll find out a lot more information about what you're looking for.
Wonderful, thank you, I will do that.
Just to back up a bit, as far as his ancestry, his mother was Cree. Is that correct?
His mother was Métis.
Oh, Métis.
Part Cree, part European. The whole family had a background of a Métis background, which involved both First Nations and Europeans.
Mm-hmm.
Any more questions?
Well, you know, my burning issue is, of course, the Kanakas, the Hawaiians, and they were part of the building of Nanaimo and everywhere else on the coast with the Hudson's Bay Company. Is there any references to them in your book?
Yes, there is. I'm very aware of the Kanakas involved with the Hudson's Bay Company and their involvement with Nanaimo and other projects. The Kanakas are an excellent group to study. There is a book out on the Kanakas of BC, which I'm sure you're aware of.
Yeah.
And definitely McKay knew a lot of them. He got along with everybody.
Thanks. Yes.
Well, if there's no more questions, I'd like to thank you again, Greg. And I think I can speak on behalf of all of us saying how amazed I am by the depth of your knowledge of Mr. McKay's life. It's incredible, the detail that you know. It's like you've very much taken him on as a person. So thank you so much. It was delightful to have you, and I hope you will come back, write something else, and come back and visit us again.
Thank you very much, Christine. You were also very helpful to me in researching the book. Monica Miller, who I think is with us tonight, is the marketing director at Heritage House Publishing, which published the book, and says that it's available, and she's checked with chapters, window seat books, and Strong Nation books, all in Nanaimo.